Hey everyone, I'm Ben, the amateur exegete, and this is episode 67 of Bible Study for Amateurs. Today's episode is Elizabeth Shively's Purification of the Body and the Reign of God in the Gospel of Mark, Part 1. The first miracle story in the Gospel of Mark takes place in the village of Capernaum. You can find this pericope in Mark chapter 1, verses 21 through 28. Capernaum was situated on the Sea of Galilee, along the northwest shore, and was, like so many towns and villages along the lake, known for its fishing industry. The town appears frequently in the Gospel of Mark, and to such a degree that for some scholars this suggests that the narrative's author made his home there. According to Mark chapter 2 verse 1, Capernaum was home for Jesus, despite the fact that we are told in chapter 1 verse 9 that Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee, and that Nazareth was, per chapter 6 verse 1, his patris, hometown. While in Capernaum, Jesus did what any observant Jew of the period would have done on the Sabbath. He went to the synagogue. But he doesn't attend to listen to a sermon, but to deliver one himself. What Jesus taught isn't narrated, but the reaction to it is. They were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority, and not as the scribes. A scribe was one who enjoyed a measure of literacy that allowed him access to the sacred texts, often in some official capacity. This note by the evangelist anticipates the conflict Jesus would have at times with the scribes. Just then, the author continues in verse 23, there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit. The words rendered in the NRSV Updated Edition as just then are in Greek kaiouthos, a conjunction and an adverb that together in the Gospel of Mark can function as a way to express the immediacy of events, or, simply, as ways to move a narrative along. The translation offered by the NRSV Updated Edition takes kaiouthos to mean that this man appears somewhat suddenly, entering the scene as Jesus has finished teaching. The man is described in Greek as en pneumati akatharto, rendered in most translations as with an unclean spirit. While the preposition en can certainly mean with, it often functions the way the English preposition in does, to indicate that something is subsumed by or contained within something else. Does it here? Joel Marcus entertains the possibility in his commentary, remarking that a literal interpretation has a great deal to commend it. The man's personality has been so usurped by the demon that the demon has, as it were, swallowed him up. The fusion of the man's identity with that of the demon is underlined by the grammar of the passage. In chapter 1, verses 23 and 24, it is the man who cries out. But in the next verse, Jesus rebukes him, which now means the unclean spirit. Since normal human beings keep their distance from uncleanness or dirt, this picture of a man in an unclean spirit, enclosed by that which contaminates him, is horrifying. This identical construction of the preposition en plus the dative pneumati and the adjective akatharto appears in Mark chapter 5 verse 2. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, Immediately, a man from the tombs with, or perhaps better, in, an unclean spirit met him. In Mark chapter 5, the idea that the demon has swallowed up the man, to use Marcus's language, is clearer because of the possessed man's behavior, living among tombs, superhuman strength, howling, and injuring himself. Writes Marcus, "The man's identity has been swallowed up by the demons, so that he speaks with the demon's voice, tries to protect the demon from eviction from his own body, and becomes the demon's instrument for his own torture." Back in Mark chapter 1, the demon confronts Jesus inside the synagogue. "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth?" he asks in verse 24. "Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." The questions here are interesting for a number of reasons. For starters, why does the demon speak of us, and then uses the first person singular to say he knows who Jesus is? Why does he need to address Jesus as Jesus of Nazareth when questioning him? What does destruction entail for this demon? These questions could easily take up their own episodes, and so, for now, we will table them. What interests here is the statement the demon makes right before Jesus' rebuke. "I know who you are, the Holy One of God." There is a contrast made between Jesus and this spirit. While the spirit is unclean, akathartos, Jesus is holy, hagios. In her commentary on the text, Adela Yarbrough Collins sums it up poignantly. "The holiness of Jesus is the polar opposite of the uncleanness of the spirit," she writes. In his encounter with the entity, Jesus issues a rebuke, commanding it to shut up and leave the man. It does, but not without putting on a show. "And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying with a loud voice, came out of him," we read in verse 26. At this point, the narrative comes full circle, for just as those in attendance were astonished at his teaching, so too are they amazed at his ability to control unclean spirits. Later in the Markan narrative, Jesus' foes will level the absurd allegation against him that his control of these spirits is done with the authority of Beelzebul. This pericope is part of what John Donahue and Daniel Harrington call a paradigmatic day. From sun up to sundown, Jesus teaches with authority, expels demons, and heals the infirmed. These activities will characterize much of what Jesus does throughout the Gospel of Mark. Undoubtedly, the evangelist included these stories to intrigue the reader, but is there more to it than just that? For example, why include exorcism stories at all? The author of the fourth Gospel felt no need to include any such incidents, and nevertheless concluded that while Jesus did many other signs, the ones in his narrative are written so that you may continue to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you might have life in his name. Over the course of the next several episodes, we are going to explore the connection many Markan healing and exorcism narratives have, and what they might be communicating about the significance of Jesus. To guide us, we will be using Elizabeth Shively's 2020 piece, Purification of the Body and the Reign of God in the Gospel of Mark, that appeared in the Journal of Theological Studies. In the abstract to that paper, she writes, "The thesis of this study is that the Markan Jesus' activities of healing and exorcisms are evocative of resurrection of the body." Why she thinks this, and how it plays out in the Markan narrative, is what we will begin to consider in the next episode. That's all the time we've got this week. See you next time, and remember, in the words of Richard Elliott Friedman, one does not need to deny what is troubling about the Bible in order to pay respect to what is heartening. Thanks for stopping by.